So we're going to call the meeting to order. Will you please take the roll?
Commissioner Burke. Commissioner Dunn.
Here.
Commissioner Hart. Here. Commissioner Gilmetti. Present. Commissioner Guardino. Present. Commissioner Hinman.
Here.
Commissioner Kehoe. Commissioner Medalfer. Here. Commissioner Tavoloni. Here. Chair Alvarado.
Yes.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Item number 2, approval of the minutes. Been moved and seconded. Any questions, corrections? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Commissioners' meetings for compensation.
Move approval.
Been moved and seconded. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Executive Director.
Commissioners, for my report today, I have several items to report. Commission staff hosted a legislative staff roundtable on December 20th, 2016, at which time Commission staff presented the legislative recommendations that the Commission had for the legislature to consider. We had attendance, we had more than 50 legislative staff members that attended this meeting, and subsequent to that roundtable, we have had numerous follow-up discussions with legislative staff members, legislators that are members that are interested in moving some of the commission recommendations forward. This morning, commission staff met with a few key legislative staff members, and we had a very good discussion today talking about development of the commission's legislative recommendations for next year and working with the legislature over 2017. And we also discussed holding regular meetings with those legislative staff members moving forward. Also wanted to report that yesterday, a few of the commissioners and staff attended a tour of the Transbay Terminal. It's a remarkable project. There's a lot happening there. Commission staff will work with the Transbay Joint Powers Authority on future tours as this project continues, and just wanted to thank the Transbay Joint Powers Authority for providing that tour for the commission yesterday. Also, commission staff alongside Caltrans held jointly a workshop to discuss development of the asset management plan. There was about 30 key stakeholders from across the state that attended the event, and it was really a good workshop to set the stage moving forward on identifying priorities for the state, managing the state's assets. I guess now I would just like to share an update on staffing. We are still in the process of recruiting for a road charge deputy director, the vacancy that was filled when Mitch Weiss accepted the programming position with the commission. Commission staff is also seeking a Staff Services Manager 1 position that would serve as the administrative officer for the commission, managing the operations of the commission's day-to-day activities with respect to procurement, personnel, and other matters. And with that, commissioners, I want to let you all know that Rosemary Mejia, our administrative officer, has told us that she is retiring.
What?
And yes, where's Rosemary? Rosemary, I'd like you to come up, please. And,
Voting on this.
right. We didn't. She just informed us. So, Rosemary, if you want to come around here, we have something for you. Rosemary, just to let everyone here know, she has 33 years of career with state service.
That math doesn't look right.
I know. She has worked for a number of agencies, beginning with Consumer Affairs and, high-speed rail and here. And I guess with that, I would just like to, on a personal note, I need the mic, to let you all know that Rosemary was a valuable member of our team. She will truly be missed. And on behalf of the staff and the commission, Rosemary, we wish you all the best in retirement. And with that, we have something for you.
Thank you. I can't read. That's for your job. Thank you.
All right. Oh, did you want to? That's okay. We can do it later. We can do it.
We can do that at the break.
We can do it
Take
at
the other ones.
break. Commissioners, I had one more item to share with you today. Today on your agenda is a consideration to adopt the Regional Transportation Plan Guidelines. And I just want to let you know that development of the update to these guidelines is not an easy task. And I would like to really recognize and call out Garth Hopkins and Laura Pennybaker for all the work that they did over the last several months, working with stakeholders across the state to reach a balance and bring these guidelines forward to the Commission to consider. And I also wanted to thank all the key stakeholders that participated in this. It's a lot of time and effort on behalf of everyone statewide, and just want to thank everyone who participated in this and who informed the development of the update, and also wanted to thank Caltrans for their assistance in really carrying forward the staff work on this. So with that, Commissioners, that concludes my report.
Questions? Commissioner reports. Christine. No, up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a sad announcement that former State Senator Lucy Calais, who represented San Diego, Jim and I know her well, passed away this morning. She was an Assembly member, a State Senator, a San Diego City Council member, and a real role model and a wonderful public servant. So I asked the Executive Director if we could adjourn in her memory tomorrow.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Farther up.
Sorry about that. I was pushing the green button there. I just wanted to report that I attended TRB, and several of our agency partners are there, and Caltrans, and I just really want to encourage us to make sure that we bring all of that info back and figure out a good way to really kind of share the info. I had the pleasure of sitting in a number of the freight sessions, as you might guess. And so Comey and I were taking a bunch of notes, but I think there's really some great work that's done, and we need to figure out how to share that after we get back home. So Malcolm, I don't know if you all have a standardized process, but just love to make sure that we do share what we learn at those and what we can implement here. Thank you.
It's higher. There you go.
Thank you. Well, on a lighter note, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, we have successfully done our 12th annual Silicon Valley Turkey Trot. I have a few extra shirts for commissioners and staff, and others if you want them, because you can sweat in style if you come to a meeting of the California Transportation Commission. So when we take our first break, if you're interested, I have a few left over, and would be glad to see you walking down the street as a walking billboard for our race. Thank you all.
Very good. Anybody else? Okay. We don't have anybody from Brian or Little Brian, so Mr. Dotry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Just a couple of things that I can provide an update on. One thing, you may have worked with Tom Hollenbeck in the past. Tom was a longtime district director in District 9, and then the last couple of years of his career were up here as the Division Chief of Traffic Operations, and he retired as of last Friday. I had the opportunity to sit with Tom and talk about his experience at Caltrans over several different decades. In his departure, Mr. Robert Peterson will be the interim Division Chief for Traffic Operations until we fill that long term, so I just wanted to share that with you. Also, on the kind of organizational structure and personnel, we consolidated our innovation, risk, and strategic management offices into one position, and we recently filled the chief of the innovation and risk and strategic management office with a gentleman by the name of Blair Thompson. We stole him from the Department of Motor Vehicles, and that office really is going to help us keep track of the implementation of the strategic management plan from 2015 to 2020. Also, our State Transportation Innovation Council, our STIC, our ethics hotline, risk management, our Lean Six Sigma, as well as open data and supporting the conduct of our executive board. So I just wanted to make that announcement and make you aware of that. On January 10th, Governor Brown released the 2017-2018 budget. As part of that budget, he also included his transportation funding and reform package. It's very similar to what was proposed back in September of 2015 with slight adjustments. The package calls for just about $43 billion in increased resources to transportation over the next 10 years. And as was proposed before, that's pretty evenly split between state and local needs for the transportation system, with certainly a priority on Fix It First, which is what we've been talking about over the last couple of years. We certainly will be working with Chair Fraser on AB1 as well as Chair Bell on SB1 as we go forward and talk about transportation. And I know it maintains a priority not only for the administration but for the legislature. So we continue to look forward to working with them on that. I would also like to comment on TRB. I also attended the Transportation Research Board annual meeting in Washington, D.C. We had a good representative group from the department. When we return from that trip, we usually compile all the different sessions and meetings that each of our folks that attended that went to, as well as a more detailed list of all the notes that were taken. There were more than 13,000 attendees to this year's annual meeting. That's a mix of public, private, and academia when it comes to transportation. Our folks participated not only in committee chairs, committee members, but in different sessions from freight to technical issues on bridges and pavement, to traffic management, to planning, as well as adaptation and sustainability, and the list goes on and on and on. When we compile all the different sessions that we participated in, I will be sure to share that synopsis with your executive director, and she can feel free to share with all of you. That way you can see the benefit that we gained from participating in that annual meeting. One very significant opportunity that I had was at the chairman's luncheon. I had the opportunity to present the Frank Turner Lifetime Achievement Award to Mr. Norman Mineta. And if you know Norm and you know his political career, if you know his professional career and his involvement in transportation, but if you also know his life story, going from spending time in a Japanese internment to serving in the cabinet of two different presidents, I can think of nobody better to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Transportation Research Board. So that was certainly an honor for me to be able to make that presentation to him. One other thing that I do want to talk about are some of the impacts and activities that we've had over the past week with storms. And as we bring up some photos, I'll actually roll through some of these, but I just want to give you a sense of some of the things that we had to deal with, not only from mountain roads to snow impact roads to coast, as well as low-lying areas. We had, over that week, 116 different damage sites, and you can see a representation through photos of some of those sites here. Those damage sites were in 38 different counties. That does not count the closures that we had to endure from some of the snow impacts. And to give you an order of magnitude, up on Donner Summit, over about a 3-day period, we got about 9 feet of snow. And in valley areas, we got as much as 10 inches of snow, or 10 inches of rain during that same time period. The damage, including director's orders, emergency contracts, totaled about $90 million to be able to repair some of those slides, and $80 million of that is done through contract work. And now with the oncoming storms, we think it'll be a series of about 3 storms between now and Monday, obviously the first one being here upon us as we speak. We anticipate another 6 feet of snow and another probably 4 to 5 inches of rain throughout the state of California, and these storms will probably stretch farther south than the past storms did, but you can see some of the things that we endured. I sent a note out to my staff, certainly acknowledging the efforts of our maintenance and our equipment staff, as well as our traffic operations centers, traffic management centers, as well as some of the staff that processes the emergency contracts. But this gives you some sense, and certainly some of the local roads endured some of the same impacts that we did on the state highway system. So I just wanted to make sure that I gave you an update on that, and we are prepared for some of the oncoming storms, or as prepared as we possibly can. We have struggled mightily in having the seasonal help, the adequate staff for seasonal help on board, but we're making do with as best we possibly can to deal with some of the storms. So I just wanted to provide that update. So with that, I will see if there's any questions, and happy to be engaged in all the agenda items you have here this week.
Questions? Thank you. Mr. Mamano.
It scrolled perfect, so I just wanted to.
Going for a new look now with the glasses. I think it makes me look smarter. You tell me. Because then I do this. Like that. So now,
It's going to take more than
it's
glasses.
not, all right, I'm there.
Unless you get the kind with the nose and the mustache.
Is that it? Oh, okay, then I'm in. Be careful, it might show up. Happy New Year to you all.
Happy New Year.
So right now, we're under continuing resolution until April 28th. So that's we talked about the FAST Act, it gave us the 5 years, but each year we need the annual appropriations to fund the FAST Act. And right now, we're on a continuing resolution until April 28th and hoping for a longer one eventually. Congratulations to Malcolm. I don't know if everybody knows that Malcolm was appointed to the transportation, he was the executive director. Give me your right title.
The chair of the executive committee.
The chair of the executive committee for the Transportation Resource Board. And that's actually, that's kind of a big deal. He's the chair of the executive committee, and that was appointed by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. So congratulations to you. That's a good kudo. Didn't report this at our last meeting, but for the first time in many, many years, several decades, I think, Caltrans achieved, or statewide, we achieved in the DBE area, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise area. Our goal is 12.5%, and we achieved well over the 12.5%. So congratulations for the first time in, I know, as long as I've been here, so congratulations on that. And that's a lot of effort to everybody. It's the DBE community, it's the locals, it's the contractors, it's the state. So there's been a lot of effort that's been put on, a lot of focus, trying to bring the DBE community into the fold and making sure we can get to a point someday to not have contract goals. That's ultimately our goal, is to not have contract goals on projects, because that means the DBE community is part of our workforce and it's happening. We're not there yet, and I think Malcolm would agree that there's a long way to go before we get anywhere near that, but I've appreciated the effort and focus that's gone into that, and it's made a difference. So all our performance rules are out now, performance management. The last couple came out last week. The bridge performance, bridge and pavement and system performance came out last week. Real quick highlight on it, there's going to be some webinars next week on it, so you have to register for those webinars. They're open to the public. Anybody can do it. Those are, you can go to our Federal Highway website and search through to find performance management, and they're going to have the webinars on that and give you the update on what's going on with those. So the final rules are out, so that means they're now regulation. On the system performance, there were 3 measures of system performance: percentage of reliable person traveled on the interstate, percentage of reliable person traveled non-interstate, percent change in CO2 emissions generated by on-road mobile sources. There's a measure that will evaluate truck time reliability on interstate system, and that's the average truck reliability index. There's 3 measures to assess congestion mitigation and air quality, total emission reduction for applicable criteria pollutants for non-attainment and maintenance areas, 2 measures to assess traffic congestion, annual hours of peak hour excessive delay per capita. So there's a few of those, and then the bridge side, we have 4 measures of pavement condition and 2 measures of bridge condition. So they're out. It's going to be a lot of work still as we move forward to develop our targets. That's a combination. That's an effort that we'll do with the state. We're going to have meetings all around. We've already, Susan's already talked about some of that. That I appreciate the forward thinking that you all already have, and talking to my counterparts up in my headquarters who came out to those meetings. They were very positive about where we're at in California. I think we're ahead of the curve. But I think you've been moving in that direction, I think, for years now. So I don't think this is new to California, which I think makes it very helpful. So those are coming, so keep your eye out on those. I'd encourage everybody to participate in those webinars. Anybody, I'm looking back this way, anybody that's interested in it, please do that. There'll be a lot of information in that, a lot of handouts, a lot of frequently asked questions, all of those types of things.
Vince, the safety ones were previously released.
Correct.
So they were out as well. And then the next step is for us to establish targets of what level of condition or safety measures we're going to be able to accomplish with federal dollars, and we're going through that process now.
All right, the other piece from a statewide freight plan, they're in the process of doing that update. There's meetings around the state. They're looking at designating the critical rural and urban corridors. So there's going to be meetings around the state. Our office working with Coco Shop and trying to get that all together. There's a lot of effort going into that. And lastly, NEPA assignment. Right now, and if it's okay, Chair Frazier, I'd like to ask you kind of where the status is of that. But right now, California, we've got NEPA. Federal Highway has NEPA until we get the passage of sovereign immunity, because that's a critical piece to having NEPA. All the MOUs are in place, so as soon as that happens, we'll be in good shape. And Chair Frazier, I don't know if you'd be able to comment on where that is, if you don't mind.
So at this point in time, we've asked for an urgency position on the bill. I'm carrying it.
Okay.
And but we need committees assigned in the assembly so that we can actually have a committee hearing. So we're waiting to hear who and what is assigned, and then we'll move it as fast as we can.
Okay. And this is a California thing. I'm just pointing out where we're at. So as of now, Federal Highway is responsible for all NEPA in California. And that is in our MOU that we have, we've designated the date of March 31st. If we don't get NEPA, if we don't get sovereign immunity waived by March 31st, then we'll have to restart the process to apply to NEPA assignment again. So that'll start over. So March 31st is that date that we have. That's what went out in the register, in our public notice to the register. So that's where we're at with that. And that is all I think I have.
Question?
Vince?
Yes.
A question, we in California very proudly submitted a number of fast lane applications, so we're really hoping this second round. And so I have a question for you in terms of the continuing resolution. Do you all have the money that you could, or do you have to wait until after?
No, we have the money until the 28th. I don't know, Julie, do you know if we have the money for we do have the money for the fast lane, right? So
For
we do
all of
have the
them?
money for the fast lane
For the
grant.
second round?
Yeah,
So
that's
you
what I
could-
thought, yeah.
You could pick us today and
I'm
we'd be
looking
great.
forward to it. I'm looking
Okay.
forward to it. It's going to be great. My
Pressure's
glasses
on.
don't work, so I can't read what I'm looking at. but-
Okay, when you look at those reports talking about hours of delay per capita, I'm sure you're going to find us in there, our
Right,
states, so.
right.
I just had to give you a little bad time. And then I think also the final version of Beyond Traffic was just recently
Right.
issued, and I don't know if you all find that helpful, but I refer back to, I think you guys did a great job in terms of giving us some good facts, so thank you.
And there was a lot of input that California had to the final version of that. So I appreciate that effort. Any other
No
questions?
further questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Our regional agencies.
Good afternoon. Melissa Garza with the Fresno Council of Governments and the RTPA moderator. So the RTPAs met this morning, and we received an update on the governor's proposal, and I think that it's going to be discussed later on today, as well as the funding bills that were reintroduced in the legislature. We also learned about the statewide needs assessment, the update to the statewide needs assessment, and we are very excited that we're going to be working on that. And we understand that it's a very timely effort. So we will be providing whatever you need to help tell the story for this endeavor. We are hopeful that it will illustrate the dire needs that we face in transportation. So we want to make sure that you reach out and that we provide as much information as you need. We also received a very depressing presentation on the results of the local streets and roads report, and not that it was information that we didn't anticipate, but just to see the images of how our infrastructure continues to decline and putting us at risk. And so we are utilizing that information to continue to tell the story, to reach out to our elected officials, and to incorporate that information and the data that came out of it for our RTPs as we move forward with that. I do want to add that local agencies continue to look for innovative and sustainable, cost-effective measures to deliver the needs and improve our infrastructure, but it's evident that our pavement condition index continues to drop, putting us in the at-risk category, and we understand that we need to continue telling the story. As far as NEPA assignment, we discussed AB 28 shortly, and we do want to continue to send letters. A lot of our regions have already submitted letters of support, and that effort will continue in hopes that there will be a solution before there is more impacts. The regions are going to be working with our local agencies and putting together a list to identify any potential delays due to the suspension, and so we will incorporate this information, compile it, and provide it to your staff to be able to share it with the commission. Also, regarding earmark repurposing, we did hear that Federal Highways will be issuing approvals for the projects in February, and we're very excited to hear that. We've been waiting for the approval since December. We're eager to start moving forward with those projects, and so we are holding that deadline or that date to really start incorporating and implementing those projects. Also, on the California Freight Investment Program, we've been participating in those workshops, and we now feel that there is momentum moving and going, and we're excited to see how we can continue to shape the guidelines, and looking forward to the draft guidelines. We do want to say that the regions support the framework of the TCIF. We feel that there was a lot of elements and components to that program that worked within the corridors, the coalitions, the partnerships that took place with the state, and so we want to continue to have those and incorporate that collaboration and coordination with the state. And lastly, I want to say that regarding the RTP, we want to thank your staff as well. I know it was mentioned earlier, but we want to thank your staff for the wonderful work that took place, with the amount of work, it was a very robust process, and so we want to commend your staff, thank them for being very inclusive and transparent in this process. We believe that the plan strategically incorporates the federal and state mandates and that are required for long-range planning, and so now we need to roll up our sleeves and start implementing. So with that concludes my report, and I can answer any questions if you have any.
Questions? Thank you. Rural counties, Maura.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Maura Toomey, Chair of the Rural Counties Task Force. The Rural Counties met on January 13th and discussed the following issues and concerns. In regards to the RTP guidelines, the Rural Counties would like to thank Commission and Caltrans staff for all their efforts to develop the new guidelines. The rural counties especially appreciate the efforts to address their specific issues and concerns, particularly modeling and public participation. And with that, the rural counties support the adoption of the RTP guidelines. That concludes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Thank you. Self-help.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Keith Dunn, Executive Director of the Self-Help Counties Coalition. I'm happy to report that the Self-Help Counties Coalition had a board meeting at the Focus on the Future conference, had a lot of good discussions. We're looking forward to a year in which we'd like to coordinate more closely with the commission. We'd actually like to request a town hall meeting where we got together and just had a formal discussion of some of the issues I think that we've all been working on for some time and do it in a more formal fashion. So we've made that request to staff. We're at your schedule's discretion, but it's something that I think that we would like to see moving forward and really just try and coordinate our efforts as there are more and more issues that are coming before us. There's been a lot of discussion about the NEPA delegation and AB 28. Self-Help Counties Coalition was asked to be the sponsors and working with the department and Chairman Frazier on that measure. I would like, at this point, having heard from our federal partners about the 90-day notice, which is part of an MOU and a very formal process now, which is hard to unwind, that if you have an opportunity, I know that Chairman Frazier in the Assembly, as soon as he gets a committee set, is going to have the bill heard, but then we're going to need to move it really quickly off the floor to the Senate and get it to the governor before the 31st. Can be done, difficult, yes, yeah. So I mean, some of you on this panel who may have been in the Senate at one point in time that have friends there still, if we have an opportunity to talk about the importance of having this bill heard, we'd like to reach out to you and let you know that that's something that we're going to need help with. It's a short deck. We can't let this lapse. Self-help counties alone, let alone all the other county and city and state projects that are, I will say, are in jeopardy. There's some discussion about what point they are in that process, but we're talking about a year, a reset that could delay things up to a year, exacerbated by all the other issues that we see coming down the pike on funding. So it just keeps putting us further and further behind. We, as we like to say, have promises made, promises kept with our expenditure plans, have an obligation to our voters. We need to get this done. So at some point, you may hear from me to ask you to help us get this set in the Assembly, and then we're going to work to get it off the floor, and we're going to try as hard as we can to meet the March 31st deadline. But as the chairman said, we don't even have committees yet. So we're halfway through January, and the clock is ticking. We're continuing to work on all the RTP plans as well, and are looking forward to supporting AB1, which we have a letter that I can share with you if you would like. The chairman would like to thank you for your continued efforts to work to provide funding. There's also SB1, and we're supporting both of those measures. There's really a nominal difference, I think, and the chairman would be able to tell some of the specifics. But you know, they're largely the same kind of a dollar figure. Is it enough? We'd like to see it be 10 times as much, but it's a really great start. I think it's a point where in discussions with members of the legislature that is starting to resonate with folks, especially as they hear that there's continued decline in projects that they're hearing about in their districts. The governor's budget came out. It's a little larger than last year and has some really good components, and we're looking forward to pushing that as well and coming together with both chairmen and houses of the legislature to find a common ground. But we just really want to stress the importance of the funding packages and that we're over there burning shoe leather, talking to people and really telling them from a self-help perspective, 2/3 of your voters selected these projects, and now without action from you, because we can't fund all of it, we need partners, they may be in jeopardy or delayed. So it's a busy year. We're looking forward to partnering with the CTC, looking forward to having the town hall if you all agree. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Oh, one more thing. And the FAA issue continues. We're continuing to meet with the Federal Aviation Administration. We're hopeful that there can be a fix to our sales tax issue without any formal legal action on our part, because I don't really want to go on any no-fly lists any more than I'm already on. But we're continuing that dialogue, and we're hoping that whatever this new administration brings, that there's maybe some common ground. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Dunn, thank you so much for your efforts and all that you do. One question that you might want to share with everybody is, what's today?
It is Wednesday.
Yeah, what else?
It is my 46th birthday.
There you go.
Happy birthday.
Wish
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Dunn happy birthday.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further questions? Item 12, Garth?
Commissioners, as Sunny Wright McPeak and Lloyd Levine make their way up to the podium, I'll just do a real quick introduction. But tab 12 is our standing item on innovations in transportation. It's this afternoon we have Sunny Wright McPeak and Lloyd Levine representing the California Emerging Technology Fund. The California Emerging Technology Fund was created to provide leadership statewide to close the digital divide by accelerating the deployment and adoption of broadband in underserved and unserved communities and populations in California. Their pre-presentation today centers on actions to increase broadband internet connectivity throughout California. For the past 10 years, Sunny Wright McPeak has served as the president and CEO of the California Emerging Technology Fund. Prior to assuming this position, she had served as the secretary of the California Business, Transportation, and Housing Agency as a local elected official and at several Bay Area economic development agencies. Former Assembly member Lloyd Levine is president of Filament Strategies, a technology policy consulting firm. During his time in the legislature, he was actively involved in broadband, a number of issues relating to broadband and energy-related policies. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you very much for such a great introduction. Can you all hear me okay? All right, I think I have a cold and therefore I'm not sure how loud I'm speaking. So, Chairman Alvarado and members of the California Transportation Commission, Chairman Frazier, Director Doherty, what a pleasure it is to be back among all of you extraordinary California leaders. And thank you for serving. Mr. Taglione, you must hold some kind of record on the CTC. I'm impressed. And I must say, if I might take just a moment of personal privilege, I have watched how Caltrans has handled the storms. Very grateful that I'm not on the Caltrans speed dial any longer. That I, used to lie awake at night about how to keep the roads open, and I want to commend you, Malcolm, and your team for the extraordinary work that you have been doing through the storm. So thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think a round of applause. Once a secretary, always a secretary. What Lloyd and I are going to talk to you today about is what you already have done and encourage you to do more. So I'm coming to talk about broadband as a green strategy that improves mobility and actually also reduces impacts on the environment. You've got policies in your plans that align with what we're doing, and we want to encourage you in 3 particular areas to take even more leadership. So you already have the background on CETF that we have a mandate directive from the California Public Utilities Commission to close the digital divide, so we look at all opportunities to achieve that. And some of you will remember that I harangued you over the 3 E's when I was serving in public office for a prosperous economy, a quality environment, and social equity. Lucy remembers that very well because she had HCD responsibilities to try to advance that. We always argued with Jim over the 3 E's. And there was a little bit of an initiative that, the other Jim, about Go California. And the point of this is that we had, as you'll remember, Malcolm, a really intense discussion about the product of our investment in transportation is mobility. It's not just projects, it's not just maintenance of the system, but it is mobility, and we can measure that. And therefore, the best trip is a virtual trip when we're trying to unload congestion on our system. And we had this pyramid that people got so sick of. I didn't actually draw it. It came from Caltrans, but you did put it on the cake that you gave me as a going away gift. And so just look at this demand management segment and also intelligent transportation systems, both of which require broadband. And that, the notion of that graphic, which always oversimplifies something, is to be able to evaluate all the plans in terms of the outcome to mobility and systematically look at the regional plans, the interregional plan, the statewide plan, on whether or not the most cost-effective strategies, best practices have been exhausted. So broadband is a green strategy to improve mobility and to reduce congestion. Former Assembly Member Lloyd Levine, who's also a founding member of the California Emerging Technology Fund, has actually done a pretty good analysis of how far you've already gone in the alignment of policies with what we're proposing, and then we'll close out with 3 major opportunities we want to encourage you to consider. Lloyd?
Thank you, Sunny. Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity. I assume I just pushed this one. Look at that. So this slide was from the results of our 2016 annual broadband adoption survey conducted by the Field Poll here in California just last summer. So this data is about 6 months old. And what it shows is, as we at CETF like to say, there's a 30% of Californians who lack meaningful broadband access. 16% have no broadband access at all. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to go with the number 30% because we feel the definition of meaningful broadband access is a much more important definition than just the 16%. So I want to set that as the backdrop. So we're talking about today, and our mission is to how to connect those other 30% of the Californians to the internet in a meaningful way so that they can recognize the benefit of the 3 or 4 E's, as Sunny has said. Specifically within the data, there's a number of subsets of populations where you can look at the connectivity. Interestingly enough, as it relates to Caltrans and Caltrans' ability to help connect, areas with populations of less than 10,000, and we don't have any data below that, but the trend goes on, lack broadband connectivity in greater percentages than urban areas, and that's obvious. It's more expensive to connect those rural areas. You do have within the CTC mission on technology, and I'm not going to read this because it is straight from your mission, I just put it there as part of the presentation, some really advanced language and policies on the incorporation of technology into your work and into the transportation system. You also have some excellent mission statements and work on climate change, and we're here today to help link those together. This is, again, so we had a complete presentation. Given the amount of time we have, I will not be reading the entire thing. There are numerous environmental benefits to broadband, but I can tell you this, whatever we have here today is going to be obsolete in 6 months to a year to 2 years to 3 years. Former CPUC Commissioner Sandoval and I were having a conversation a few weeks ago, and she said something very, very smart. And that was, it was very obvious, but the Internet of Things can't happen without the Internet. She was very committed to deploying the Internet, and it's true. And we all think of the Internet of Things in many different ways, but what we haven't really seen yet is the Internet of Things as it pertains to the transportation sector. But it's coming. I have a car that's 1 year old, and it could be a broadband hotspot if I chose to pay for it. The technologies that would enable, the communication systems between my car, the streets, the roads, the traffic signals, mapping programs, et cetera, could be very beneficial. But if we don't have the ability to deploy the internet ubiquitously and access the internet ubiquitously, there'll either be disparate outcomes or disparate connectivity. Through some work that we at CETF contracted for a few years ago, we developed some recommendations, again here, bullet points that are for your edification but not to be read during a presentation like this, on a variety of different things that can be implemented to improve, to be implemented by CTC to affect broadband as a green strategy to help deploy broadband and some of the reasons why it might work. And there's 5 points, and there's the first 3 and there's these 2, and they're all in your packet. I'm not sure how this slide got in here. You put it, it's the same. Apparently we had an editing issue. most recent development, and one we've been working on for quite some time, both of us have traveled around the state giving talks to different conferences on this, is the Dig Once policy, and that was adopted in a bill by Assemblymember Wood last year, AB 1549. And we think this is an opportunity for the CTC to take a real leadership role. The Dig Once policy sounds pretty simple, and it really is. When Caltrans, or if it's the local governments, are digging up roads, lay conduit. How many times have we seen roads being trenched and dug up by one company to lay their fiber or lay their cable, and then a few weeks later, a few months later, it's dug up again, and you end up with the road being dug up multiple times, the road surface being rutted, never repaved smoothly. What we're proposing is a statewide, local, and state comprehensive policy on Dig Once, where when an entity or company causes the roadway to be dug up, conduit is laid with access points, mapping, and interconnectivity, so that anytime a new company needs to lay conduit or lay fiber, they can go through the existing conduit. They don't have to dig up the road, put down their own, and this is the area where we think there's significant opportunity for the CTC to be the collaborating and convening force, working with Caltrans to develop these policies. How do we grant access? What kind of fee structure do we use? All of those and more can be worked out, but it's not exactly rocket science, and we think it's vitally important. This is basically, sorry, just what I just said. I got on a roll there. I apologize. We also have 3 other opportunities that we think are important for the CTC to take a leadership role in broadband as a green strategy. And it's really a summation of kind of the points that Sunny and I both gave. Incorporate broadband as a best practices for transportation planning, interregional and regional plans. Reduces congestion and improves mobility. And as I said a few minutes ago, the ways that happens will be multiple-fold in the future. Those of you who use things like Google Maps and Waze and other services that route you around traffic and congestion, those are just going to get better and better. As I just said, lead on collaboration with Caltrans and the CPUC on implementing a very comprehensive Dig Once policy that could be taken by the local governments as well, and convene workshops on broadband as a green strategy so that we can find out what the best practices are around the state, what other minds think that broadband can be used to help the transportation sector. How do the ports think? Enable wiring the ports, getting more broadband connectivity to the ports can help reduce congestion, reduce greenhouse gases. Bringing together people from around the state of California to weigh in on a specific focused topic of broadband as a green strategy. Thank you very much, and Ms. McPeak and I are available for questions.
Questions?
Be nice. Be nice, Senator.
I will be nice. As you probably remember, I was on the task force for a while, and we've been discussing these issues for a long time. I know you've both been working really hard on them. How would you gauge the progress over the last almost 10 years now, and what are the the 1 or 2 key things that you would support that would bring the most bang for the buck?
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, most of the broadband, is it true that most of the broadband lack of coverage is both in some of the core urban areas and in more remote rural areas? Is that true?
Yes, it is. The legislature did adopt one of our 2 big goals that we established when CETF was stood up. One was on the deployment side, the supply side, getting the infrastructure built of 98%, i.e. getting to 98% of all households in California with high-speed internet service. And then the other was on the adoption side, or if you will, the demand side, we set a goal of getting 80% of all households to adopt broadband. When we look at what the PUC has mapped for wireline and wireless, our estimate is that we're approaching 97.5%. However, California is a very large state, and so we don't want to be fooled by the tyranny of a large denominator or numerator on that there's still a very significant number of households and rural communities that lack any access, and a woefully larger number that is underserved, so below threshold speeds that we would consider appropriate for consumers. And then poor communities often get bypassed on infrastructure upgrades. As you saw in the data that Lloyd presented, we're at 84% adoption, but 14% of that is with a smartphone only. And a mobile device is a marvelous, machine. It gives us lots of freedom, lots of ability to use apps all over the place. It's really difficult for students to do their homework and actually adults to get workforce skills having a smartphone only. So we've come to refer to them as the underconnected. So that's backdrop, Senator, to the following. We know that the last increment of deployment is the most expensive because it's the farthest out, and it requires a whole lot of coordination. We in California have had the benefit of the legislature establishing, when you were there, and when Chairman Frazier has served, the California Advanced Services Fund. That needs to actually have additional funds authorized by the legislature to continue to have a resource. The point of us coming to you is that being able to coordinate the deployment of, if not the broadband at the time, but the conduit so that we can go back, really falls to this arena to bring everybody together. We have a local, regional, state, bottom-up kind of process and a dynamic in California for transportation planning. 85% of our monies go to the regions. The MPOs have a responsibility. What we're saying is essentially three things that were in this proposal for action. Caltrans, by virtue of the law that Jim Wood, Assemblymember Wood, authored, is to come up with the procedures for implementing. We think, in addition to Caltrans, that CTC being involved in convening workshops with the MPOs and the county, self-help counties, et cetera, could make a big difference. That this is an appropriate group, leadership group, to help facilitate that. The second is that there needs to be established or identified strategic corridors where you don't want to, every time we're doing something, put in conduit and if we're not going to need it. There needs to be some very strategic thinking, and that involves, I would submit, Caltrans with CTC and the PUC and the telecommunications industry in order to get that right. It's a really, it requires leadership. Can't be done by formula. The dig once policy, when you get into the layers of it, believe me, I do know this, it requires a huge proactive effort and a database on the part of somebody, and it's now going to fall to Caltrans, to actually push out that information to notify everybody and say, do you want to be in this trench? Our experience and observation is that only about half the time would anybody who actually wants ever to be in that trench will say they want to be in that trench at the time you notify them. But it might be a really strategic corridor. I have done this on Highway 99 up and down, the 290, 72 miles, and so you've got to have a coordinated effort, Senator. Thank you, Chairman.
Lucy?
Thanks very much. Thank you, Sunny. And I apologize if this is sort of a simplistic question, just trying to connect the dots from the private sector. And Malcolm and I have had this conversation. A lot of the private sector providers are trying to implement early the 5G network and get that equipment in place as quickly as possible. And yet there's issues of, do they pay a big dollar to do this or a small dollar to do this? And Caltrans is working on a policy to figure, is that all part of this, Sunny, from the standpoint of implementation? And then the question is, when you're looking at that 30% that is still in need of access, that doesn't include yet the 5G side, right? I mean,
correct.
We're still working on the old stuff, let alone moving to the new stuff that we need in order to get this intelligent transportation system, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay. That's what I need.
Bob told me to be short.
No.
You're
but
right.
but that's important
I like it.
because then we have to find out from Caltrans where they are in the development of the policy and what's the timeline on that, for that, Malcolm?
And as you heard, if I might, I will add now, as you heard Lloyd say, we know technology is moving a lot faster than government does.
What a
And
surprise.
I'm sure it's beyond my little head to understand it all. The
Yeah.
California Broadband Council, another entity in statute, nowhere near the kind of power that you have, is also trying to figure out where is that technology may be going and where can there be a breakthrough. So they will want to consult with you.
Commissioner Gilmetti, then Commissioner Hart.
Mr. Levine, you mentioned, I'm a big fan, by the way, of the dig once, I agree with you. Who decides how much conduit goes in and who pays for it?
Well, that's precisely what we're asked, what the legislation is asking Caltrans to do, to develop standards in collaboration with the industry. We believe it should be a collaborative process to decide what the appropriate size of the conduit is, the connectivity issues. We would like to have it, that I gave a talk about a year ago now in the South Bay, where you have city after city after city, and they were all expressing interest. And one of the things I cautioned was you need to have, similar policies so you don't have a 1-foot diameter pipe meeting up with a 6-inch diameter pipe and having connectivity issues like that. There's all sorts of issues that need to be decided. What are the standards? What is the access? How do you grant it? Is it a lease model where Caltrans actually pays for the conduit and then leases access to it? I don't know if that's something that the providers would be willing to do or not.
Well, it's not all Caltrans. I mean, obviously, we're sitting
Right.
here with Caltrans roads, but there's a lot of local roads, et cetera.
Correct.
I mean, do you have policies in mind that cities and counties can adopt?
We do. Again, it's dependent upon developing the standards so that the Caltrans system, because they're going to have to interconnect. The communications network is ubiquitous, so a city's network will eventually have to connect to the middle mile and last miles, and cities are going to have to connect to the backbone, which might be on 99. I keep pointing to Malcolm because
Then the question is who pays for it?
Well, that's the question. The flip side is it's a lot cheaper to lay down conduit once than to continually dig up the road.
I'm with you.
And that again goes back to our suggestion isn't to implement a policy that we write, but that CTC should be the leader in a task force that brings together multiple parties to answer this question. You have to have the telecommunications providers in the room to know what they want, because ultimately they're going to be the customers for the conduit. How much will they pay? What is the cost model? I'm not sure about that. I can't answer that.
Thank you.
So just real briefly, I can offer up some answer to that. So our obligation right now is to make sure that when we do a project and we have to dig, that we offer to industry an opportunity to speak up for interest in putting in conduit or fiber optic in that location. We would require them to pay for it at that installation, and we would require them to put extra conduit capacity for any future interest in going in that alignment. And so they would pay for the installation. As far as the use of the right-of-way, what I'd like to work with industry on is additional capacity for us, for our infrastructure, and that would be compensation to us for the use of that right-of-way. But there's a bigger opportunity, and I think that was touched on, in greater coordination, because it's going to be mildly successful every time we do a project to do outreach to get the right feedback that we want. And I think that it would be a lot more beneficial to get that plan in place so that we know where industry is interested in going, such that as we plan our projects, we can coordinate better. Right now, we just have to do outreach to ask for interest, and then they would pay for it, and then we've got to coordinate it during construction, which in itself would have its logistics.
Jim? Further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Summary is here of what we are proposing. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 13, Eric.
Thank you, Commissioners. Can you hear me? This is an action item. This item, the staff is recommending the Commission do two things. One, accept the staff report, which is in the yellow book item that is sent to you. And in addition, we'll discuss a draft letter in response to Senate Bill 4, Senator Mendoza's bill related to freight. First, the bills that are listed in your staff report. I can't hear myself. Can you hear me? Okay. are the ones that we are tracking at this point based on the Commission's legislative tracking policy. I would like to bring one more bill to your attention. Yesterday, Assemblymember Bigelow introduced Assembly Bill 174, and I just bring this to your attention because it will be added to the list as it requires the Commission to have one commissioner that resides in a rural county with a population of less than 100,000. So staff will continue to monitor that bill. And any other bills that you would like us to monitor, just let us know. Second, I wanted to just briefly mention this draft letter that staff has drafted related to Senate Bill 4, which, among other things, enacts the Goods Movement and Clean Trucks Bond Act, authorizing $600 million in GO bonds upon voter approval for the purpose of goods movement-related projects and programs, $200 million of which would come to the Commission for freight mobility infrastructure type projects, and the $400 million would be available for ARB to award grants for things like clean trucks and other clean air quality projects. Considering the potential for using existing transportation revenues for non-transportation purposes, staff has composed this draft letter for the Commission to consider submitting to Senator Mendoza, just urging him to incorporate safeguards to protect transportation revenues and ensuring these revenues are invested in transportation to be consistent with the annual report recommendation that the Commission just put out in December. And if there are any questions about that letter or about the bills that are being tracked right now, please let me know. Or anything else you want to talk about.
Questions, comments? It's an action item.
It is.
We'll need a motion.
Second.
Been motioned by Tavanoni, second by Dunn. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 14, David.
Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an information item. Mr. Clark Paulson, the Acting Division Chief of Budgets at Caltrans, will provide you with an update to the information in the Budget and Allocation Capacity book item. He will discuss project allocations so far in fiscal year 16-17, savings, future allocations and capacity, and how funding might be affected by the Governor's recently released budget, as well as other items. Mr. Paulson.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. I am filling in for Stephen Keck, who I miss today more than perhaps you do. I will do my best to do a passable cover for him today. The first piece of information is traditionally provided. This is a pie chart that shows the status of allocations through your last meeting in December. The information shows 47% of the capacity allocated as of the December meeting. A person like me who's an accountant does the math and says December's halfway through the year, 47% is about halfway through the allocation capacity. So it seems like the allocations are on target. This is actually an improvement from past year and an improvement on some occasions when delivery has been very much backloaded in the fiscal year. So the progress is, I think, good and appropriate through this point in the year. With regards to the Governor's budget proposal, as was mentioned earlier, the proposal was issued on January 10th. This chart that you have is a simplified display of the parts of Caltrans' budget as are defined through the state budget structure. State operations covers both the department's administrative costs as well as the maintenance and operations of the state highway system. It covers all of the staffing and engineering work of project delivery, and it covers the equipment and fleet of the department. Capital outlay is construction contract work as well as real property acquisition. Local assistance is the subvented funds to local agencies. And so you'll see that the budget proposal of the Governor calls for a $1.2 billion increase in Caltrans' budget. could be a little deceptive because it assumes adoption of the governor's financing package. So it assumes additional revenue during fiscal year 17-18 and then plans for the expenditure of that revenue. The proposal also calls for a slight reduction in staffing level at Caltrans. The reduction of 31 positions is associated with a reduction in workload in the project initiation development work. The Director Doherty talked about the proposal included in the governor's budget as it relates to transportation financing and reform. So as he mentioned, there's the budget proposes an increase in several sources of revenue that would bring in $43 billion over the next 10 years of additional revenue for transportation purposes. The fiscal year 17-18, which is the proposed governor's budget, is a partial year in terms of that revenue, and so there's $1.8 billion proposed for fiscal year 17-18. The proposal calls for increases in a per vehicle fee, which is $65 per vehicle. It calls for increases in cap and trade resources, and it calls for an early repayment of outstanding loans back to transportation funds. The proposal to increase both gasoline and diesel excise taxes would take effect in fiscal year 18-19 with indexing to keep pace with inflation following that year. And of course, there's the big if, which is that this proposal, because it involves revenue increases and tax increases, would require 2/3 approval by the legislature. So some specifics as it relates to the funding or the expenditure of those funds. And I won't go through this in detail, but suffice it to say that the governor's proposal includes the majority of the funds being used for state highway system and local road maintenance, the fix-it-first approach, along with several other programs that would be financed by the governor's proposal. And I'll just touch on a couple of those. The governor proposes a corridor mobility improvement program, which would provide $2.7 billion over 10 years, focused on congested areas in the state, providing multimodal investments such as managed lanes. The governor's proposal would continue the trade corridors improvement with an additional $2.8 billion over the 10-year period. And finally, the governor's proposal would discontinue the annual adjustment of the price-based excise tax, rather fixing that rate at 18 cents per gallon, or I'm sorry, 18 cents, and then indexing after to be adjusted for inflation. This is a key point in terms of the stability that you have found important, is critical for financing transportation, and it deals with maintaining purchasing power of those resources. So this next chart is designed to show you what the governor's proposal would do in terms of the last fund estimate, which was the 2016 fund estimate. And if you recall, just about this time last year, as part of the fund estimate assumptions, you adopted a straight line assumption with regards to price-based excise tax increases from the current rate of about 10 cents through the end of the period to 18 cents. If the governor's proposal was adopted and the tax increase took effect in fiscal year 18-19, then it would jump immediately to 18 cents, and about $1.1 billion in additional resources would be available for programming. This, if this proposal is adopted, this would become part of the 2018 fund estimate development. We'd have something a little more precise, but just to give you an understanding of the general idea of what these resources would do in terms of programming capacity. This $1.1 billion would be distributed 44% STIP, 44% local, and 12% for the shop. So just wrapping up this presentation, a look forward at upcoming events. The next auction, the cap and trade auction, will occur in February. In March, for your March meeting, we'll be back talking about fund estimate draft assumptions. In April, Caltrans will release the Chart C and the transportation financing package. And at your May meeting, I'm sorry, not at the May meeting, but in May, the governor will release the May revision to his budget. Any questions?
Jim. Thank you, Clark, for a great report. We can send Stephen a little note that the person who is filling his desk currently is doing a great job. He can stay gone as long as he wants.
I suspect he's watching, and so you won't fool him.
Wow, shoot the messenger.
Yes, he does. Quick question. Number one, that graph that you showed, I'm assuming that with an additional fund estimate, the blue line that is level and intersects would actually continue to go up, and there would be more good stuff, gray stuff in the middle with funding, right?
So this is kind of dependent on inflation, but if one assumes that inflation increases, then 1920, 2021, there would be some adjustment based on the indexing and the inflation.
Right.
Stephen's coming back.
Yeah.
That didn't last long. Honeymoon's over.
Just a quick comment, observation for our continuing edification. I really wonder who of us years ago would have looked at it, thought we'd ever see a chart like this where the STIP program is the most anemically funded program of everything we have except for the aeronautics program. It's a pretty sad statement. It goes to the work that Chairman Frazier and Chairman Bell and the governor and others are working hard to try to overcome. The gas tax is just not doing it the way it is, the way it's structured, and our lack of other funding mechanisms is not happening. So, for those who wondered if we would ever go over the cliff, we have gone over the cliff. We have fallen off all the way. We've hit the bottom. If we haven't felt the pain by now, I really don't know where we're at. So this is just a little comment. This used to be a really routine report, but it's, to me, one of the most critical things that we have to look at every meeting. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. Can we go back to page 4?
I think I lost the presentation, Gina. I'm
we
sorry.
timed out. Oh,
my
darn.
clicking became a little too aggressive.
You talked, that was the heading, the governor's transportation funding and reform package. I think you also had this year as well as last year a proposal of $100 million savings from Caltrans. Do we have an idea where we're going to find $100 million?
Well, and that's an annual savings, so over the 10 years, it would be $1 billion. And the idea there would be to find efficiencies in project delivery, either through performance metrics on what we spend on support cost or additional tools to accelerate project delivery. And what that would do would create $100 billion of extra programming capacity for capital projects as opposed to being utilized in the support that we do. So that would be the concept. There is a list of measures that we have laid out to try to accomplish that $100 million of savings each year annually. And one thing that I do want to, for complete accuracy, point out, in the latest governor's proposal, one change was not going back to the price-based excise tax, resetting at 18 cents, but resetting it at 21.5 cents. So that chart is actually slightly outdated. So I just want to make for complete accuracy, that's actually the current governor's proposal is to reset the price-based excise tax at 21.5, not 18.
So, Malcolm, are there things on that list that we can start working towards? Because we'll take any portion of that $100 million that we can get and put it to to programming, I think.
Yes,
So
I think
anything we can do.
that's the case. I think we're already laid the framework for doing that in our current support cost budget in some of the performance metrics that we've put out there, as well as measuring how much we're spending to deliver projects depending on the scale and complexity of the project. There are several tools, such as public-private partnerships, CMGC, and design build that we need to have at our disposal, and some of those things are in the works. But the internal things, I would go so far as to say we are starting to implement those as we speak.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, can I just make a slight correction to something Director Dougherty just said? It is true that the governor's proposal does change it to 21.5 cents, but the 18 cents is what's going to fund the STIP, and the delta is actually for new programs. So that chart is correct, just for Mr. Paulson's benefit. I just wanted to point that out.
Eric, thank you for preventing me from correcting my boss. So the 3.5 cents funds some of the other programs that the governor has proposed.
What are the other programs?
So let me come back to that slide. So on this slide, which is slide 5, the governor's proposed funding for local streets, a local partnership program where locals match, and this is similar to a program that was part of Prop 1B. He's proposing funds for corridor mobility improvement to deal with congested areas and trade corridors. So there are some other programs that are funded both from the 3.5 cents, that's the difference between the 21.5 and the 18, as well as the $65 per vehicle.
Does it go to local partnerships or local streets and roads, or both?
Both. So if you will, you've got a pot of these extra funds. The 18 cents is...
we don't have extra in this room.
No, extra isn't the right word, additional. So you have the 18 cents that by law goes through the proration to STIP, SHOP, and local streets and roads. Then the governor dedicates additional funds from the additional vehicle fee and the 3.5 cents for the variety of programs that are here as well.
Does the 3.5 cents come through us?
That's yet to be determined. So we don't have the proposed language in the bill that will tell us who programs what and how that works. Stay tuned.
Any further questions? Thank you. Item 15, Mitchell.
Commissioners Clark Paulson will be presenting this item also.
I'm back. Stephen didn't tell me I'd have to do this twice. So today's discussion regarding the fund estimate is really simply an overview of the mechanics of the fund estimate and a discussion of the steps and the schedule that will follow over the next several months in working on the fund estimate. The fund estimate, as you well know, is really the driver of allocation capacity for the programs that the Commission oversees and allocates funds for. The fund estimate identifies for a 5-year period resources. Every 2 years, the fund estimate is updated, and it estimates the resources for both the STIP and the SHOP programs. The Commission's role is providing guidance to Caltrans as the fund estimate is developed, to adopt the fund estimate in every odd-numbered year, so here we are. And then the adoption of the fund estimate leads in the even-number years to the adoption of the STIP program. Specific dates that are outlined in statute, by July 15th, Caltrans is responsible for presenting draft fund estimate to the Commission. By August 15th, the Commission is directed to adopt the fund estimate, and then the April 1st adoption of the STIP. It's worth noting that the law allows the Commission to extend the period of adoption for the fund estimate, which we'll talk about a little bit later because the Commission meets in August, a day after the August 15th deadline. Those provisions of law also allow some flexibility. We've talked about the proposals that the governor made, that Assemblymember Frazier has made and Senator Bell has made, all of those proposals conceivably could impact the fund estimate. And depending on the timing and the progress of those proposals, the Commission has the authority to extend the date for adoption of the fund estimate by 90 days. Or, of course, the Commission can adopt the fund estimate and then subsequently amend it, as was done for different reasons in the last cycle. The fund estimate, as I mentioned, is has a 5-year life and is renewed every 2 years. And so there's always some overlap with regards to the fund estimate, which is an appropriate opportunity every 2 years, essentially, to refresh the estimates and assumptions that have been used. So as we move forward to the 2018 fund estimate, that will be, if you will, an update to where we've been with the past 2014 and 2016 fund estimate. The statutes provide some guidance with regards to the assumptions that are made in the fund estimate. One of those is that the statutes direct that only existing enacted laws should be considered in developing the fund estimate. So we've talked again about proposed revenue increases. We really can't consider those revenue increases for formal adoption in the fund estimate. It doesn't mean we won't consider them and be prepared should they be adopted in one form or another. But in terms of the fund estimate that is actually adopted, it has to reflect current statute. And then the statutes also provide guidance about the estimation of expenditures that come into play in the calculation of the fund estimate. So some probably oversimplified math for you in terms of how the fund estimate is calculated. The beginning point is the cash available in Caltrans accounts, projections of revenue using a number of assumptions out during the 5-year period. Those are the pluses. Then you subtract from that non-program commitments, administrative costs of the department, local assistance, maintenance and operations of the state highway system, and the completion of the existing adopted projects. That leaves the balance that's available for programming over the 5-year period. So upcoming dates, during the March meeting, we will come to ask for your guidance with regards to assumptions, particularly related to revenue for fund estimate development. In May, we will come to the Commission to formally, after you've given us your input, formally adopt those assumptions. In June, we will present the draft fund estimate, and then in the August meeting, the fund estimate will be formally adopted by the Commission. I'm going to pause at this point before we proceed to the last step to ask if you have any questions.
Nope.
So the last step then is the department's recommendation that the fund estimate adoption be extended technically by 1 day, but to the date of the August Commission meeting.
Is that an action item? So moved.
Motion by Arp, second by Taglioni. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Thank you.
Okay, item 16 is a timed item. So let's move down to 18. Mitchell?
Item 18 is an informational item. This is a Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee and Pilot Program update. We currently have about 5,014 vehicles participating, and these vehicles have driven over 18.7 million miles. Between July 1st and November, 58 participants dropped out of the program, and as a part of this process, they were asked if they could provide some information about why. About half indicated they were withdrawing for personal or family reasons, and a quarter indicated that it was too complicated or time-consuming. The pilot completed an open enrollment period in November. During this period, 43 vehicles changed account managers and 49 vehicles changed reporting methods. We're awaiting the results of Caltrans' survey of those people to learn why they chose to make the change. At our December meeting, the Technical Advisory Committee received a report which included some of the lessons learned thus far in the pilot. Those included, and as one might expect, an experienced account manager system has tended to run much smoother than new systems. One of the phone apps concerns were raised about the battery drainage and data usage. Not all the mapping datas that the programs use identify private roads. And then even if a car is equipped with telematics capabilities, participants must have active accounts to a certain level in order to be able to utilize that option. And overall participation in the participant satisfaction in the program has increased from the pre-pilot survey to the mid-pilot survey, and also the opinions on the fairness of the road charge have increased. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Mitch, I'm a participant in the program, and I had a vehicle change, and so we had to send the device back and get a new one, and I'm just thinking that folks are going to find that to be too cumbersome. So it seems to me that there ought to be a way that you could update the software and say what your new wheels are, and it could just go on from there. So.
Yeah,
and then I also share that my colleague who took possession of the other car freaked out when I said I was just going to leave my pilot project in there. So I suspect we still have some outreach to do.
Yes, and those are the important things we hope to learn during the pilot. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you. Item 19, Don.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. So item 19 is an information item which provides a general update on the development of the guidelines for the California Freight Investment Program. To date, we've held 3 workshops so far. We've covered many topic areas, including evaluation criteria, deadlines, and geographic balance. Staff is still on track to release final guidelines at our May meeting. And I would like to note that we did receive, which you should have in your packet as a pink, we did receive a comment letter from the California State Transportation Agency late this morning, which all of you should have a copy of it. Basically, the administration is stating that they would like us to consider the administration's priorities, which includes a couple of different set-asides for the California-Mexico border projects and for rail safety projects, with the remaining funding going to the originally nominated projects. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Get this really contemplating look on your face there, Commissioner Harp.
It's a rare thing for me to
Thank you very much. Let's go to... Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. No, thank you. Thank you, Chair. In relation to our, tab 19, I just wanted to add a few comments about the funding for projects that should be prioritized to accomplish kind of the following: improve velocity and throughput along key goods movement corridors across the state, improve California's economy and create jobs, and to achieve an equitable distribution across the state and contribute to transportation sector emission reductions. And again, we had that kind of value in 2170, and we look forward to the CTC being able to implement, and again, a TCIF kind of process that worked very well, which you guys administered. So, we look at the letter from the Secretary on allocations, but I would hope that the CTC would look forward to the highest priority and best value in their impression of how it would help equitably across the state.
Thank you. I think we're going to go ahead and open up item 16. We've only got a couple minutes. So let's take item 16. Laura?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tab 16 is an informational item. As required by California Government Code, Commission staff has been working in cooperation with regional agencies, Caltrans, the Air Resources Board, and a wide variety of other stakeholders over the past 6 months to update the Regional Transportation Plan guidelines. The guidelines were last updated in 2010 to address new requirements resulting from the passage of SB 375. The 2017 update was undertaken to address new requirements to incorporate public health guidance resulting from the passage of Assembly Bill 441, as well as changes to federal statute resulting from the Fixing America's Surface Transportation, or FAST Act. Additionally, this update sought to reflect planning practice advances in the areas of modeling, active transportation, goods movement, climate adaptation planning, transportation technology, and performance measurement. Prior to adopting updated guidelines, statute requires the Commission to hold one workshop in Northern California and one in Southern California as part of regularly scheduled Commission meetings. As you recall, there was an informational presentation at your December 8th meeting in Riverside, which served as the required Southern California workshop and which provided an overview of the RTP guidelines' purpose, the update process, and the major proposed changes to the guidelines. This informational item today serves as the required Northern California workshop. This item provides an additional opportunity for staff to explain the process undertaken to update the guidelines, outline the major updates that resulted from that process, and allow for any final stakeholder input and discussion prior to your consideration of the guidelines for adoption, which is proposed under tab 17. First, I'd like to quickly provide an overview of our process. The RTP Guidelines Work Group was established last June to convene subject matter experts to update various policy and technical areas within the guidelines. The work group contains representatives from all levels of government, public health, environmental, social equity, and business organizations, among others. 2 public drafts were circulated for review and comment in July and September. Hundreds of written comments were received, logged, and incorporated by Caltrans staff as feasible. Over the past 6 months, staff organized 11 work group meetings. 9 were held in Sacramento, with additional meetings in Los Angeles and Fresno. At least 30 separate meetings were held with various stakeholder groups during the duration of our process. It is important to note that unanimous consensus amongst work group members was not always possible during this process. In the event there were policy areas that warranted additional discussion beyond what could be accomplished in the full work group setting, staff coordinated subgroups to bring key stakeholders to the table to discuss specific topics and to reach consensus as best possible. Subgroups were formed to specifically address guidance in the areas of climate change, performance measurement, transportation electrification, and environmental justice. In the event consensus could not be reached at the subgroup level, compromise language was developed as best possible, or direct statutory language was reflected in the guidelines. Next, I'd like to provide a brief overview of the documents that you have before you for your consideration today. As I previously mentioned, there were a total of 2 versions of the draft RTP guidelines that were put out for public review, comment, and work group discussion. The first version was published on July 6th, and the second version was published on September 21st. In each version, staff used red font to represent language that was added or amended, and strike-throughs were provided to denote text that was deleted in that particular version. A concerted effort was made to transparently communicate any changes within the document that occurred between each subsequent version to all of the workgroup members. A full chronology of each draft of the RTP guidelines is available on Caltrans' website. The red font in the 2017 final draft guidelines before you for consideration today reflects new language that was added or modified as part of the work group and or public comment process between version 2 in September and now. Since the December Commission meeting, subgroups have worked diligently to finalize the language regarding Title VI and environmental justice in Section 4.2 and to compile additional planning practice examples in Appendices K and L. All other areas of the final draft guidelines have not changed since the version that was presented for your information in December. To capture the full spectrum of changes that have been made to the guidelines since the 2010 version, Section 1.8 details each part of the guidelines that has been substantially updated and the nature of the revision. Lastly, I want to provide some very brief highlights on the major revisions to the RTP guidelines that resulted from the work group and public comment process. These include separating the guidelines into two versions, one for metropolitan planning organizations and one for regional transportation planning agencies, updating federal requirements throughout to reflect changes resulting from the FAST Act, providing a summary of policies, tools, and resources to promote health and health equity, enhancing information related to climate change adaptation, updating the regional travel demand modeling chapter, expanding the consultation and collaboration chapter to highlight Title VI and environmental justice considerations, and adding information regarding freight planning and transportation technologies. In conclusion, staff would like to acknowledge and thank the many individuals representing a wide range of government and advocacy groups who participated in the guidelines update process. These individuals devoted many hours to writing language, reviewing and commenting on multiple drafts, participating in numerous meetings, and working very collaboratively to update these guidelines. I also want to recognize and thank CTC Deputy Director Garth Hopkins for his leadership in this effort, as well as the following staff from Caltrans who aren't present but I'm sure are watching via webcast today. Priscilla Martinez Velez, who did the majority of the staff work to put these guidelines together. Kelly Egan for her work on the modeling chapter of these guidelines, as well as Reza Navai and Aaron Thompson for their oversight of this effort. This was an extensive undertaking, and Commission staff greatly appreciates the partnership and efforts of all of our stakeholders. That concludes my presentation. I am happy to take any questions you may have.
We have 6 speakers, so we'll listen to the speakers' input, and then we'll take comments. Shariah Chakar first. And then Ted Smalley, if you'll line up. And then Tanisha Taylor.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Shreyas Jethgar with Coalition for Clean Air and also a member of the California Cleaner Freight Coalition. And just a quick introduction of our Freight Coalition. We are made up of environmental justice, and public health groups that are seeking to restore greater balance in the freight industry in terms of it better addressing emissions and the disproportionate impact of the pollution from the freight industry and the communities that live near freight hubs and freight facilities. Those communities often are predominantly low income and people of color. This is an issue of environmental justice. And we, of course, recognize the important economic factors that go into the freight industry and that it's a significant part of our state's economy. We don't mean to minimize that. We want to seek a balance between all those issues. The coalition has been very focused and remains focused on making sure that we have good laws and regulations to clean up the vehicles and the equipment that are used in the freight industry. And what we started to realize is that infrastructure is and must be part of that solution. And so that is how we kind of got led to this process of being involved in the RTP guidelines update and making sure that freight issues are updated since it's been many years since the last update to these guidelines. And following from the Sustainable Freight Action Plan, which calls on Caltrans and state agencies to do a lot, we realize this really takes all hands on deck. There needs to be more involvement from local and regional entities, and so this is also why we got involved in the RTP process. I'll just hit on a couple points. Transportation electrification was sort of a major issue, and we are pleased that the final draft does include language from the Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act, SB 350. It stops short of making a requirement of MPOs to support transportation electrification infrastructure, but we think it's at least in there. It's a good step, and we very much look forward to implementation. That's, of course, where the rubber meets the road, pun intended. And in this case, we are working to make sure that Appendix L has good guidance, good links to funding resources for MPOs to plan and invest in transportation electrification infrastructure. And we want to make sure that those guidelines are as useful for the MPOs as possible. So we look forward to staying involved on the implementation side and Lastly, I do want to just point out again that, as noted, pollution does not affect everyone equally. There are disparate impacts of this industry and of air pollution in general. And we do want to just go on record to say that this could be better addressed in the RTP guidelines. In general, environmental justice does need to be better addressed in our transportation sector. But at the least, we are happy and we support adoption of the final draft guidelines, that it does a better job of addressing emissions, incorporating new technologies on the infrastructure and vehicle side, and I think better ensuring that we're going to meet our federal health-based air quality standards, as well as our state climate laws. And finally, I'll just want to say thank you to the staff for a great process of including us and others in the work group meetings, and even at times when it was, I wouldn't say tense, but when we had some disagreement, I think we had good resolution and again, support adoption of the final draft of the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted Smalley, and then Tanisha Taylor, with Renee Denier Oki following up.
Thank you. Ted Smaller, Tulare County Association of Governments. I just briefly want to say we echo the comments made earlier by Melissa Garza representing the RTPA group. And we support the CTC's effort, especially the staff. They did a great job through all this. It's a very difficult process trying to get all this together. So we support the CTC recommendations, and just note that in the San Joaquin Valley, you approving this is very timely as we're getting ready to get our RTP going, and they'll be done in a year and a half. So again, thank you, and we support the effort.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Tanisha Taylor with CalCog. Our organization represents the 18 MPOs as well as many of the regional transportation planning agencies that are subject to the guidelines. And first, I'd like to say thank you and commend the remarks that have been made about staff. They really did an outstanding job in bringing together diverse interest in this process, and we are here to support the adoption of the guidelines by the Commission. Just a few points to echo. We've heard about environmental justice. I will highlight and commend the staff for working with the various interest groups to identify a more robust Title VI and environmental justice process through the guidelines. We did move from approximately 2 sentences to roughly 6 pages, so that was a significant lift in the process, and staff, I commend you for doing that and working up to the last minute to get that incorporated. The timely development, which you heard from my colleague Ted Smalley, it is very timely for these guidelines to be adopted at this point, as you've heard, to allow our member agencies to incorporate the new requirements and to wade their way through the numerous state and federal requirements and incorporate them into their processes, which will, in some cases, will be adopted as early as July of next year. Again, I'm here to commend you with recognition that for each page of the guidelines, there is an additional cost that comes with implementing the guidelines, which are often come without funding. And so as we can identify sources for funding for planning, we're here to advocate for that type of information as well. So again, Tanisha Taylor with the California Association of Councils of Governments, and I'm gladly here to support staff's recommendation to adopt the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Renee and then Marcus.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Renee DeVere Oki here on behalf of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. I wanted to thank staff for bringing everybody together in a clear and transparent process. We are in support of the guidelines that you've put forward for adoption in the next item. I want to give a special thanks to Laura and Garth for their leadership in this process, and especially in listening to all of our modeling conversations as we've worked our way through here. So thank you very much, and we're in support of everything you've done.
Thank you. Marcus, then Chanel Fletcher, and then Don Batesi.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak. My name is Marcus Gasterjon. I'm here on behalf of the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network. We're a statewide health advocacy organization that focuses on issues that impact low-income communities and communities of color. Here to voice our support for the RTP guidelines. CPAN was one of the co-sponsors for AB 441 by Senator Monning, Assemblyman Monning, and it required the inclusion of the public health and public health appendix. We're very glad to see that that is included in this draft. I think it reflects a strong collaboration between the staff and stakeholders. We specifically want to thank Laura and the CTC for all the work that was put in, and the close collaboration with the Department of Public Health and the Health in All Policies Task Force. That being said, there were some challenges that were had. When the guidelines were released, CPEN and partners quickly put together community meetings across the state to elicit stakeholder feedback from community members outside of Sacramento. We wanted to integrate those who would be directly impacted by these policies but might not be based in Sacramento and not have a voice here. We do thank you for setting one of the meetings up in Fresno after we had mentioned that in a previous meeting. But the quick timeline meant that there was no time to follow up with these communities, and we were not able to go over any of the revised drafts afterwards. But we do want to express that we are in support of the guidelines, and we thank you for allowing us to have some input in this in the guidelines, and we just kind of urge that we would hope that you consider the summary that the coalition, our group, sent in a letter, and we wish that you would consider some of the recommendations that we make as far as community engagement in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chanel Fletcher, and then Don.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the RTP guidelines. My name is Chanel Fletcher, and I represent Climate Plan. We are a network of over 50 nonprofits committed to improving land use and transportation to protect our health, communities, and environment. So we submitted comments with partner organizations such as CPEN to share our feedback on the process. I think first and foremost, we are in full support of the adoptions of the RTP guidelines, and we really want to thank staff. I'm going to give a special shout out to Laura Pennybaker, who is here sick, but she did an amazing job in terms of being very inclusive of all the stakeholders, and I think we were very grateful for that. We saw a lot of great changes. There's stronger language on environmental justice. There's the inclusion of public health for the first time. And there's an entire appendix dedicated to planning practices, which we are, again, in full support of. I think some of the things that we kind of shared in our letter that we were a little bit concerned about, first, I think there was a really expedited nature to this process. And so we work a lot with organizations that have grassroots members who are on the ground. And so what we found with that really quick process and turnaround was that it was really hard to engage community residents and even organizations who are steeped with experience in this but aren't based in Sacramento. There were a lot of work group meetings that you just kind of needed to be in person because unfortunately you can do a lot of things over the phone, but trying to track this complicated process on a 3-hour, 4-hour call is really difficult to do. And so I think one of the things that we were recommending is finding either a way to either A, slow the process down, or B, better engage those groups that aren't based in Sacramento so that they can weigh in and share their feedback and their expertise was one recommendation that we have. I think the other big piece that we kind of wanted to share was just the consensus-based process. And so I think, again, Laura did an amazing job with all of us. I think what we did feel like, we felt like with this consensus-based piece, what happened was that if we pushed for something and there was pushback, it just didn't get included. And so we felt like that didn't necessarily feel fair, considering that we have these very ambitious state legislation around climate change, around equity, and around public health. And so we feel like in the future, again, because we fully support the adoption of the CTC or the RTP guidelines right now, but we do feel like in the future when the CTC does these kind of guidelines, it would be great to have, I think, the legislation be the guiding piece that in terms of what we include and not necessarily trying to do this consensus-based process. So I think that those kind of are the two major pieces of feedback. We have more feedback, I think that's included in the letter that's in front of you guys as well, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dawn Batiste with the San Diego Association of Governments, and I today am just here to express again and echo the sentiments of others. Thanks and appreciation for all of the efforts involved, and express our support for the RTP guidelines that will be adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? So, was this a public hearing?
This was a hearing, so we can close the hearing.
So we can just move on to 17?
Yeah, we can move right on.
Okay. Item 17.
Commissioners, item 17 is an action item. As was detailed in the presentation for the previous item, the 2017 Regional Transportation Plan Guidelines for metropolitan planning organizations and regional transportation planning agencies have been prepared pursuant to Government Code Section 14522 and are being presented to you for your consideration. Staff has one minor clarifying amendment in Section 4.2, page 75 of the final draft guidelines for metropolitan planning organizations that I would like to read for the record. In the third sentence of the first paragraph at the top of page 75, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we propose to modify as follows. Strike the word even, so the sentence reads, when an MPO receives federal funding for only a limited purpose, such as a specific service or project, it is, add the word still, subject to Title VI and all of its policies, programs, or activities, whether or not they are directly supported with the federal funds. This change was found to be acceptable by the key stakeholders involved in developing this particular section of the guidelines. With that change noted, staff recommends your adoption of the guidelines.
Mr. Chair, can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Just on some of the testimony on both of the items, just I want to acknowledge that for the small NGOs and the regional groups around the state, it's really a stretch to keep up with a big, complicated task like this and to be working with large agencies. I'm so glad that you mentioned how responsive and helpful the CTC staff are, because that's good for us to hear, and I'm confident that that's the case. The idea that it would be better if we slowed the process down, as sympathetic as I am to community involvement and engagement, you who are here at so many of our meetings hear over and over that we take too much time doing things. So I don't think that's your strongest suggestion. But I do think there's ways we can work throughout the project to help you get the information you need and to, connect with your community engagement efforts. So I think there's some very good things that you've added. I'm so glad to hear you say that progress was made and that we've added some stronger language on economic justice and health and electrification and, all those important policy elements that we do want to see advanced much more robustly. So thank you for your efforts traveling around the state trying to keep up with all this.
So the motion was by Gilmetti. The second was by Madaffer. Any further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, let's take a break. Oh. Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing that, Laura, I really, really appreciate you using a red line version when you do the updates. And I really think that's a best practice. And of some of our other agency partners who are with us. These documents, as Commissioner Kehoe said, it's a complicated process, and as difficult as it is to stay current, when you all provide a red line document, it makes it so much easier. So thank you all for doing that, and I'd encourage us always to make that our policy.
Okay, we're going to take a break until 3:05.